was in high school when I first heard the Martin Luther King quote, if you've got nothing worth dying for, you have nothing worth living for. At the time, that quote simply did not apply to me. I had so much going for me then. I was at Exeter Academy on my way to Amherst College. Perhaps like many of you, as a teenager, my life seemed much too valuable to forfeit for some lofty principle or cause. But this way of thinking also had the effect of separating me from other people. That part of me had to change if I was ever to embrace that quote. Let me share a story showing how I changed. 6 years ago, my wife and I were chaperones for a school immersion trip. Soon after boarding the plane from Terminal 1 at the Fort Lauderdale airport, the pilot announced that our departure would be delayed and gave us access to the onboard TV to pass the time. Almost immediately, the TV broadcast news of a deadly shooting in Terminal 2. We were quickly assured that the situation was under control and that we were safe. When a second longer delay was announced, we were invited to leave the plane and wait in the terminal. Many of the students did get off and were sitting on the terminal floor when the sound of two loud bangs filled the corridor. Alarms sounded and all the doors to the terminal automatically opened. TSA workers sprinted to the doors, inciting everyone else to do the same. The students and other passengers dropped everything and ran. Backpacks and even some phones were strewn across the floor. But I didn't leave. I needed to be certain that everyone was out. The terminal was soon silent, except for the sound of softly crying. A terrified woman had made the unfortunate choice of hiding under a seat. I knelt beside her and gently explained that there was no one in the immediate area and that I would walk her to the door. I ushered her to the stairs, where she was reunited with her grateful husband. Certain that everyone was out, I left the terminal. I could see groups of students and others hiding behind abandoned luggage vehicles and pallets of cargo on the tarmac. Many students were crying on calls to distraught parents. Everyone was hiding out of view of the main terminal doors where they thought the shooter would soon exit. But there was a more likely exit door for the shooter at the end of the jet bridge. This door would give the shooter an unobstructed view of almost everyone and was the greatest threat. Without hesitation, I climbed the stairs to that door. While TSA workers, worried for my safety, yelled for me to stop. Once through the door, I found a corner out of view to anyone coming through the jet bridge. My heart was pounding out of my chest as I waited for the shooter. It was then that I realized I was willing to give my life to protect our students, as well as everyone else on the ground. It was discovered that there was no shooter in Terminal 1, and theories remain about what made the sound of gunfire. But for those of us that lived through the experience, that fact made it no less terrifying. Hearing this story, you might wonder what makes a person willing to risk their life for others. Perhaps firefighters, EMTs, and other public servants are born that way. But for many of us, we were not born to act this way. For me, this behavior was born out of a fundamental change in how I viewed others. This change in myself took place during the 2 years I worked as a volunteer in another country. What I learned was that if I value all people at least as much as I value myself, putting myself at risk for others is simply the act of protecting those I care for. Even after graduating from college and teaching for 6 years, my response to the Martin Luther King quote was unchanged. Burned out where I was teaching, I joined Peace Corps for selfish reasons. I was not happy with my life and wanted an escape. Helping others was a distant second to my joining. Still, it did boost my ego to consider how much of a blessing I would be to the poor and unfortunate villagers. I joined to help myself. As was typical of me then, I put myself first. But this way of thinking was about to change. Peace Corps at the time rarely provided experiences as extreme as that of Zaire, which is the former name of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Close to half of the previous volunteers resigned before finishing the first year of their 2-year commitment. Zaire was then run by a ruthless dictator named Mobutu. And though the people of Zaire were kind and generous, there was nothing kind about the way the country was run. Peace Corps had a long list of things we as volunteers were never to do if we wished to stay safe. After 3 months of intensive training, I was dropped off at my post in the village of Gungu. A critical part of my training was learning the language of Kikongo. But once in Gungu, I really struggled to express my thoughts. The diet in the village would freak out any American. I tried to make do with a bunch of small bags of pasta that I found in the village market. Water came from a spring about a mile away and had to be boiled before drinking. It was only a matter of time before I became very sick. By far, the most miserable Christmas in my life found me lying in a mud hut, painfully ill. There were no phones, no internet, and mail came every 3 months. So I had no way to quickly communicate with anyone back home. I was isolated from the villagers by my poor language skills and likely even more by my arrogance. I have never been more alone. I was clearly not going to be the savior of Gungu. These people didn't need me then, but I desperately needed them. My life changed when I finally asked for help. The people of Gungu worked patiently with me to teach me the language and how to prepare foods. This was a critical moment in my transformation. I had come to Zaire as a self-centered individual, arrogantly thinking that I would be showering unfortunate people with my incredible American wonderfulness. But the Zairians turned the tables, and it was their wonderfulness that was now being showered on me. Humbled, I was forced to see how valuing myself above others had isolated me. I was thousands of miles from home, but now less isolated and less lonely than I ever remembered. Before the end of my first year in Gungu, I was fluent in Kikongo. I made close friends with many in the village. One day, a group of friends were having one of many discussions at my home. A village elder, Sume, was discussing how the significance of independence for those in the United States leads them to think that independence is an intrinsic good. Yet, for Zaire, independence was the beginning of an era of accelerated deterioration for his country. Sume's eloquent and impressive argument reminded me of my college professors, but he was not even a college graduate. Through this and other conversations, it became obvious that Sume was truly brilliant. My respect for Sume and his intellect continued to grow. Despite being the only one in the village with a college degree, I no longer saw myself as the most intelligent person in Gungu. What I learned was that all people deserve dignity and respect. I came to value others at least as much as I valued myself. Not long after this revelation, a high-ranking government official created an office near the edge of the village. I was waiting for the delivery of 2 motorcycles to the hospital to support our vaccination program. Surprisingly, or perhaps not so surprisingly, these motorcycles were delivered to the office of the government official. I met with him, which started well, but eventually the discussion moved to the subject of the motorcycles, which he insisted belonged to his office. When I asked if I could copy the vehicle identification numbers to check with UNICEF, he correctly figured out that I was calling him a thief. He yelled and cursed at me, and I was escorted out. What I did was very dangerous in a country like Zaire. But for a vaccination program that saves thousands of lives every year, I had to try. For the first time, I risked my safety for the good of others. That quote, "If you got nothing worth dying for, you've got nothing worth living for," finally applied to me. This gift from the people of Gungu transformed my life, but you don't need to go to Gungu or join Peace Corps to receive it. I believe you must remove yourself from the comforts and familiarity of your current life and not focus on our differences with other people, but rather how we are alike. Learning to see people from different cultures, either in our country or outside it, is the first step toward valuing and dignifying all people, which will lead to growth, connection, and happiness. And perhaps you may learn to embrace King's quote as I did. Opportunities to begin this journey are available through Peace Corps, Teach for America, and many other opportunities offered on websites like volunteerhq.org. You don't need to decide now to do something like this. I didn't until my 30s. But if nothing else, put it in the back of your mind to consider someday. You won't be sorry. Matando mingi sambo nakua mono, which means in Kikongo, thank you so much for listening.